Lost deaf girl grabbed a homeless boy's hand. Her alpha father leader did in return. Unbelievable. The autumn wind swept through the narrow streets of downtown Chicago, carrying with it the scent of roasted chestnuts and the distant hum of traffic. Marcus Chen stood at the corner of Michigan Avenue, his small cardboard sign resting against his worn sneakers. At 14, he had learned to make himself invisible, just another shadow among the city's forgotten. His clothes, donated from a shelter 3 months ago, hung loose on his thin frame. The baseball cap pulled low over his eyes wasn't just for warmth. It was armor against the judgmental stares of passers-by. He hadn't always been here. 2 years ago, he'd had a home, a mother who sang while cooking dinner, a father who taught him to throw a baseball. Then came the accident, the medical bills, the foreclosure. His mother's illness had consumed everything, their savings, their house, and eventually, her life. His father, broken by grief and debt, had simply disappeared one night, leaving Marcus with nothing but a note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't." The afternoon crowd thickened as office workers hurried past, their faces buried in phones, their minds already at happy hour destinations. Marcus watched them with neither envy nor resentment, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had learned that survival meant staying numb. He was counting the coins in his cup. 3. 47. Enough for a sandwich if he went to the right place, when he heard it. A small, frightened whimper. If you're watching this, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're from. Your support means everything, and we'd love to know our story is reaching you. Marcus looked up to see a little girl, no more than 6 or 7, standing in the middle of the sidewalk. People flowed around her like water around a stone, not one person stopping. She wore a pink jacket with a unicorn patch, clean white sneakers, and had her dark hair pulled back in 2 neat braids. Everything about her screamed loved and cared for, everything except the terror in her wide brown eyes. She was turning in circles, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Her hands moved frantically, making shapes Marcus didn't understand at first. Then it clicked. Sign language. She was deaf, and she was lost. Marcus glanced around, expecting someone, a parent, a guardian, anyone, to claim her. But the crowd kept moving, a river of indifference. The girl's panic was escalating. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her hands moved faster, more desperately. He shouldn't get involved. Getting noticed was dangerous for someone like him. The police asked questions. Social services took kids off the streets and put them in systems that were often worse than the streets themselves. He'd avoided both for 8 months, and he intended to keep it that way. But then the girl's eyes locked onto his. In that moment, Marcus saw himself, alone, terrified, invisible to a world that had decided he didn't matter. The girl took a step toward him, then another. Her small hand reached out, trembling, and before he could think about what it meant, her fingers wrapped around his. The touch was electric, not romantic or profound, but human. It had been so long since anyone had reached for him with trust instead of suspicion. Her hand was warm, soft, and it gripped his with the desperation of someone drowning. Marcus knelt down to her level. "Hey," he said softly, though he immediately realized she couldn't hear him. He pointed to himself, then to her, then made a questioning gesture. The girl's hands moved rapidly, and though Marcus didn't understand the signs, he understood the message. "Help me. Please." He pulled out his phone, a battered thing he'd found in a dumpster that still worked if you knew which buttons to avoid, and opened the Notes app. He typed, "What's your name?" The girl looked at the screen, and her hands moved more slowly now, spelling something out. Marcus watched carefully. Emily. He typed again, "I'm Marcus. We'll find your family. Don't worry." Emily's grip on his hand tightened, and she nodded. Marcus stood, keeping her hand in his, and scanned the area. A lost child in downtown Chicago. Her parents had to be nearby, probably frantic. He started walking. Emily pressed close to his side when he heard the shout. "Emily!" The voice cut through the noise like a blade, deep, commanding, filled with barely controlled panic. Marcus turned to see a man pushing through the crowd with the force of a freight train. He was tall, probably 6'3", with broad shoulders straining against an expensive charcoal suit. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his face, handsome in a sharp, authoritative way, was a mask of terror that was rapidly shifting to relief. Behind him came 3 other men, all wearing dark suits and earpieces, moving with the coordinated precision of professional security. This wasn't just a worried father. This was someone important. The man's eyes found Emily, and the transformation was immediate. The corporate warrior disappeared, replaced by a father whose world had just been restored. "Emily," he said again, dropping to his knees as he reached them. Emily released Marcus's hand and ran to her father, throwing her arms around his neck. The man, who Marcus now noticed had the same brown eyes as his daughter, held her like she was made of glass and gold simultaneously. His hands moved in fluid sign language, and Emily signed back rapidly, her small hands flying. Marcus took a step back, ready to disappear into the crowd. His job was done, but one of the security men moved to block his path, and the father's eyes lifted to meet his. For a moment, Marcus saw himself through those eyes. A homeless kid in dirty clothes, holding a sign, standing too close to a wealthy man's daughter. He'd seen that look before, the suspicion, the disgust barely concealed behind polite society's mask. He braced himself for the accusation, the assumption that he'd been trying to take advantage. But it didn't come. Instead, the man stood, keeping one arm around Emily, and studied Marcus with an intensity that made him want to run. The man's eyes moved from Marcus's worn shoes to his thin frame, to the cardboard sign still visible on the corner, to the way Marcus held himself, ready to bolt, expecting the worst. Then the man's hands moved in sign language, and Emily responded, pointing at Marcus, her signs animated and insistent. The father's expression shifted through several emotions Marcus couldn't quite read. Surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like pain. "You helped her," the man said finally. His voice was different now, softer, but no less powerful. "She says you were the only one who stopped." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "She was scared. Anyone would have—" "But they didn't," the man interrupted. "Dozens of people walked past my daughter and not one of them stopped. Except you." The security team had formed a loose perimeter around them, and Marcus was acutely aware that he was trapped. His heart rate picked up. "Look, I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I wasn't trying to—" "What's your name?" the man asked. "Marcus. Marcus Chen." The man extended his hand. "Alexander Morrison. And you've just done something I can never repay." Marcus recognized the name immediately. Everyone in Chicago knew Alexander Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, one of the largest real estate development companies in the Midwest. The man was worth hundreds of millions, maybe billions. He'd been on the cover of Forbes, Chicago Magazine, the Tribune's business section. And Marcus, a homeless kid with $3.47 to his name, was shaking his hand. Alexander's grip was firm, and he didn't let go immediately. Instead, he looked at Marcus with an expression that was becoming increasingly difficult to interpret. "How old are you, Marcus?" 14. Something flickered across Alexander's face. Anger. But not at Marcus. "Where are your parents?" The question Marcus had been dreading. "Gone," he said simply, because what else was there to say? Alexander's jaw tightened. Emily, still pressed against her father's side, was watching Marcus with wide eyes. She tugged on Alexander's sleeve and signed something. Alexander nodded and signed back, then looked at Marcus again. Emily wants to know if you're hungry. Marcus's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, answering the question for him. Alexander's expression hardened with determination. "Come with us," Alexander said. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't entirely a request either. Every instinct Marcus had developed over 8 months on the streets screamed at him to refuse, to run, to disappear before the situation became complicated. Rich people didn't help kids like him out of kindness. There was always a catch, always an angle. But Emily was signing again, and even without understanding the language, Marcus could read the plea in her eyes. And Alexander Morrison was looking at him not with pity, but with something Marcus hadn't seen in a very long time: respect. "Just for a meal," Alexander said, as if reading Marcus's hesitation. "You helped my daughter when no one else would. The least I can do is feed you. No strings, no obligations. Just let me say thank you properly." Marcus looked at Emily, at her hopeful expression, at the way she still held her father's hand, but was reaching toward Marcus with the other. He thought about the cold night ahead, the shelter that might or might not have space, the sandwich he could buy with his $3. $47, that would be his only meal today. "Okay," Marcus heard himself say. "Just for a meal." Alexander's smile was brief but genuine. "Good. My car is just around the corner." He paused, then added, "And Marcus, thank you, truly." As they walked toward a black SUV that probably cost more than Marcus's old house, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. Emily walked between them, holding both their hands, and for the first time in 2 years, Marcus felt something he'd thought was gone forever: hope. The SUV's interior was like stepping into another world, leather seats that probably cost more than Marcus had earned in his entire life, climate control that immediately enveloped him in warmth, and enough space that he didn't feel cramped despite the security team that filled the other seats. Emily sat between Marcus and Alexander, her small hand still gripping Marcus's as if afraid he might disappear. Alexander spoke quietly to the driver, giving an address Marcus didn't recognize, then turned his attention back to his daughter. His hands moved in sign language, and Emily responded with animated gestures, occasionally pointing at Marcus. Whatever she was saying made Alexander's expression shift between pride, concern, and something Marcus couldn't quite identify. "She's telling me how you helped her," Alexander said, translating. "She says you were the only one who looked at her like she was a person, not a problem." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I know what it's like to be invisible." The words hung in the air, heavier than Marcus had intended. Alexander studied him with those sharp, assessing eyes, the kind that had probably negotiated billion-dollar deals and seen through countless corporate lies. Marcus had the unsettling feeling that Alexander Morrison could read every secret he'd tried to hide. "How long have you been on the streets?" Alexander asked quietly. 8 months. And before that, Marcus hesitated. He'd learned not to share his story. Vulnerability was dangerous, and people either didn't care or cared too much in ways that made things worse. But something about Alexander's direct gaze, the way he asked questions like he actually wanted answers, made Marcus's carefully constructed walls crack. "I had a home, a family. My mom got sick. Cancer. We didn't have good insurance. My dad tried to hold everything together, but the medical bills." Marcus shrugged, the gesture encompassing the collapse of his entire world. "After she died, we lost the house. My dad couldn't handle it. One day I woke up and he was gone. Left me a note and some cash that lasted about 2 weeks." Alexander's expression darkened, but not with judgment, with anger on Marcus's behalf. "The system failed you." "The system fails a lot of people," Marcus said. It wasn't bitter, just factual. "I'm not special." "You stopped to help a lost child when hundreds of adults couldn't be bothered," Alexander said. "That makes you more than special. That makes you rare." Emily signed something, And Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something warmer. She says you have kind eyes. She knew she could trust you. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent so long trying to be invisible that the idea of someone seeing him, really seeing him, was almost painful. The SUV pulled up to a restaurant Marcus recognized from passing by. Alinea, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Chicago, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance and cost more for one meal than Marcus had seen in half a year. "Mr. Morrison," one of the security team said hesitantly, "perhaps somewhere more casual?" Alexander glanced at Marcus, taking in his worn clothes and dirty sneakers, and Marcus felt the familiar shame creeping up his neck. But Alexander's response surprised him. "My daughter's hero deserves the best," Alexander said firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." They entered through a private entrance, bypassing the main dining room. The staff, to their credit, showed no visible reaction to Marcus's appearance, though he caught a few curious glances. They were led to a private room where a table was already set with more silverware than Marcus knew what to do with. Alexander noticed his hesitation. "Start from the outside and work your way in," he said quietly. "And Marcus, no one here is judging you." The meal that followed was surreal, course after course of food that was more art than sustenance. Tiny, perfect creations that exploded with flavor. Marcus tried to eat slowly, to savor each bite, but his body betrayed him. He was so hungry that even the strange fancy food disappeared faster than was probably polite. Alexander watched him with an expression that grew increasingly troubled. Emily, sitting beside Marcus, seemed delighted by everything, signing enthusiastically about each dish. Alexander translated some of her comments, and Marcus found himself smiling at her descriptions. She called one dish "clouds with secrets" and another "tiny trees that taste like happiness." "She likes you," Alexander said. "Emily doesn't trust easily. She's been cautious since her mother passed away." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," he said. "When?" 2 years ago. Car accident." Alexander's voice was carefully controlled, but Marcus heard the pain underneath. "It's been just the two of us since then. I've tried to be everything she needs, but..." He gestured helplessly. "There are some things a father can't replace." "You're doing a good job," and Marcus said. "She's not afraid. That means she feels safe with you." Alexander looked at him with surprise. "That's remarkably insightful for someone your age." Marcus shrugged. "When you lose everything, you learn to see what matters. She holds your hand like it's her anchor. She looks at you like you're her whole world. That doesn't happen unless you've earned it." For a moment, Alexander seemed at a loss for words. Then Emily signed something, and the moment passed. Alexander's expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Determination mixed with something that looked almost like hope. "Marcus," Alexander said carefully, "I want to help you. Not out of pity, but because you helped my daughter, and because no 14-year-old should be living on the streets." Here it comes, Marcus thought. The offer that sounds too good to be true because it is. The catch, the angle. "I have resources," Alexander continued. "I can get you into a good shelter, help you get back into school, connect you with social services that actually work." "No," Marcus said automatically. "No social services. No system." "Marcus, you don't understand," Marcus interrupted, then caught himself. "Sorry, I've seen what happens to kids in the system. Foster homes where you're just a paycheck. Group homes where you're just a number. I'd rather take my chances on the streets." Alexander leaned forward. What if there was another option? Marcus's heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" My home has more space than Emily and I could ever use. I have staff, security, resources. What if? Alexander paused, as if testing the words before speaking them. What if you stayed with us? Not as charity, but as family. The word hit Marcus like a punch. Family. The thing he'd lost. The thing he'd stopped believing he could ever have again. You don't know me, Marcus said, his voice rough. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous. You're a 14-year-old boy who stopped to help a lost child when no one else would, Alexander said. You're hungry, scared, and trying to survive with dignity. I know enough. Emily was signing frantically, and Alexander smiled. She's saying please. She says you're her friend, and friends should stay together. Marcus felt something breaking inside him. The walls he'd built, the armor he'd worn, the numbness he'd cultivated. Tears burned behind his eyes, and he fought them back with everything he had. Why? He whispered. Why would you do this? Alexander's expression softened. Because 2 years ago, I lost my wife, and almost lost myself. I was drowning in grief and work, and I was failing my daughter. Then one day, a stranger helped us when we needed it most. A small kindness that reminded me there was still good in the world. I never got to thank that person properly. Maybe this is my chance to pay it forward. He paused, then added, and because when I look at you, I see someone who's been knocked down, but hasn't stayed down. Someone who's lost everything but hasn't lost his humanity. That's rare, Marcus. That's worth saving. Marcus looked at Emily, who was watching him with those wide, hopeful eyes. He looked at Alexander, who was offering him something he'd stopped dreaming about. He thought about the cold streets, the uncertain nights, the constant fear and hunger, and he thought about what it might mean to have a home again. I don't know how to be part of a family anymore, Marcus admitted. Neither do we, Alexander said. We're figuring it out as we go, but maybe we can figure it out together. Emily reached over and took Marcus's hand again, and in that simple gesture, Marcus felt the last of his resistance crumble. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay. Alexander's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. Okay, he echoed. Then, more firmly, welcome home, Marcus. As they left the restaurant, Emily walking between them holding both their hands, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into a dream. But the warmth of Emily's hand in his, the solid presence of Alexander beside him, the SUV waiting to take them somewhere that might actually be home, it all felt real. For the first time in 2 years, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. The Morrison estate was located in Lincoln Park, behind gates that opened onto a tree-lined driveway that seemed to go on forever. When the house finally came into view, Marcus had to suppress the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. This wasn't a house. It was a mansion, all stone and glass, and architectural ambition. The kind of place that belonged in magazines, not in the life of a kid who'd been sleeping in shelters. It's too much. I know, Alexander said, misreading Marcus's silence. My wife designed it. I keep meaning to downsize, but... He gestured helplessly. It's the last thing she created. I can't let it go. Marcus understood that. He'd carried his mother's favorite book in his backpack for 8 months, even though it added weight he couldn't afford. Some things you held on to not because they were practical, but because letting go felt like losing the person all over again. Inside, the house was warm and surprisingly lived in despite its size. There were Emily's drawings on the refrigerator, a stack of business magazines on the coffee table, family photos on the walls. Not the stiff, professional kind, but candid shots of Alexander and Emily laughing, playing, living. In every photo, There was an empty space where someone should have been, and Marcus realized he was seeing the ghost of Alexander's wife in the negative space. A woman in her 50s appeared from what Marcus assumed was the kitchen. She had kind eyes and the practical air of someone who actually ran the household, regardless of who technically owned it. "Margaret," Alexander said, "this is Marcus. He'll be staying with us. Could you prepare the guest room in the east wing?" Margaret's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. Will Marcus be needing anything else? Clothes? Toiletries?" "Everything," Alexander said. "We'll go shopping tomorrow, but for tonight, see what we have that might fit. And Margaret? Marcus is family now. Treat him accordingly." The word family still felt foreign in Marcus's mouth, but Margaret smiled warmly. "Welcome home, Marcus. Are you hungry? I know you just ate, but teenage boys are always hungry." Marcus was about to say no when his stomach growled again. The fancy restaurant food had been amazing, but there hadn't been much of it. Margaret laughed. "I'll make you a proper meal. Come on, let's get you settled." The guest room was bigger than the entire apartment Marcus had shared with his parents. It had its own bathroom, a bed that looked like a cloud, a desk, bookshelves, and windows that overlooked a garden that was probably beautiful when it wasn't November. Marcus stood in the doorway, unable to make himself step inside. "It's too much," he said. "It's yours," Alexander replied, "for as long as you want it." Emily tugged on Marcus's hand, pulling him into the room. She pointed at the bookshelves, then at him, signing something. "She's asking what books you like," Alexander translated. "We can fill those shelves with whatever you want." Marcus couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him what he wanted. I used to like science fiction, space stuff, stories about people exploring new worlds." Alexander nodded. "We'll get you some. For now, why don't you take a shower? Margaret will bring up some clothes. We'll be downstairs when you're ready." After they left, Marcus stood in the bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror. He looked like a ghost, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and hair that desperately needed cutting. The shower was one of those fancy ones with multiple heads and settings Marcus didn't understand. He turned it on, adjusted the temperature, and stepped under the spray. The water was hot, abundant, and endless. Marcus stood there for what might have been 10 minutes or an hour, watching 8 months of street grime swirl down the drain. He used the expensive soap and shampoo, scrubbing until his skin was pink and raw, trying to wash away not just the dirt, but the feeling of being disposable, invisible, forgotten. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than any blanket he'd slept under in months, he found clothes laid out on the bed, sweatpants and a t-shirt that were slightly too big but clean and warm. There was also a note in neat handwriting. "Dinner's in the kitchen whenever you're ready. Take your time. Margaret." Marcus dressed and made his way downstairs, following the sound of voices. He found Alexander and Emily in a large, comfortable kitchen that managed to feel cozy despite its size. Emily was sitting at the counter, signing animatedly while Alexander prepared what looked like hot chocolate. They both looked up when Marcus entered, and Emily's face lit up. She patted the stool next to her, and Marcus sat down, feeling awkward and out of place. "Better?" Alexander asked. "Yeah, thanks." Margaret appeared with a plate of food, real food, not fancy restaurant art. A burger, fries, a salad. Simple, perfect, exactly what Marcus's body needed. He ate while Alexander and Emily watched. And for the first time in forever, eating didn't feel like survival. It felt like being cared for. "So," Alexander said when Marcus had finished, "we should talk about logistics. School, for instance. Have you been attending?" Marcus shook his head. "Hard to go to school when you don't have an address." "You have one now. I'll make some calls tomorrow, get you enrolled. You'll be behind. but we can get you a tutor to help catch up. I can't afford— Marcus, Alexander interrupted gently. You're not paying for anything. That's not how this works. But I should contribute something. I can't just take— You saved my daughter, Alexander said firmly. You gave me back the most important thing in my world. There is no debt here. There is only gratitude and a desire to help someone who deserves it. Marcus wanted to argue, but the exhaustion of the day was catching up with him. His eyes felt heavy, and the warmth of the kitchen, the fullness of his stomach, the softness of the clean clothes, it was all conspiring to pull him under. You're tired, Alexander observed. Go to bed. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow. Marcus stood, then hesitated. Mr. Morrison— Alexander, he corrected. Or Alex, if you prefer. Alexander. Marcus tried the name, finding it strange on his tongue. Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's just gratitude. People don't take in random kids out of gratitude. Alexander was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking Emily's hair as she leaned against him. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but certain. When my wife died, I was lost. I threw myself into work, told myself I was providing for Emily, but really I was just hiding. Then one day, about 6 months ago, Emily got separated from me at a company event. I was terrified, the same terror I felt today. A janitor found her, stayed with her, kept her calm until security located me. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, working 3 jobs to support his grandkids. He didn't have to help. He could have called security and walked away. But he didn't. Alexander's eyes met Marcus's. I tried to thank him, to give him money, to help him. He refused everything. Said he helped because it was the right thing to do, and that was payment enough. He told me, if you really want to thank me, help someone else who needs it. So I started looking for ways to do that. Donations, foundations, programs. But it all felt distant, impersonal. He paused, then continued. When I saw you with Emily today, I saw that janitor's kindness reflected in a kid who has every reason to be bitter and selfish, but chose compassion instead. I saw a chance to actually help someone, not just write a check. And selfishly, I saw a chance to give Emily something I can't. A sibling, a friend, someone closer to her age who understands what it's like to lose everything. Emily signed something, and Alexander smiled. She says you're not random. She says you're meant to be here. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I don't know if I believe in meant to be. Neither did I, Alexander admitted. But I'm willing to find out. Are you? Marcus thought about the streets, the shelters, the constant uncertainty. He thought about the alternative Alexander was offering. Safety, stability, a chance to be something other than a survivor. It was terrifying in its own way, this hope, because hope could be lost, and losing it again might break him completely. But Emily was looking at him with those trusting eyes, and Alexander was offering him something no one else had, a choice, a chance, a home. Yeah, Marcus said finally. I'm willing to find out. That night, Marcus lay in the softest bed he'd ever known, in a room that was his, in a house that might become home. And for the first time in 2 years, he cried. Not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of not being alone anymore. Down the hall, Alexander stood in Emily's doorway, watching his daughter sleep. She was smiling, peaceful in a way she hadn't been in months. He thought about the chance encounter that had brought Marcus into their lives, about the series of small decisions and coincidences that had led to this moment. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe some things were meant to be. Or maybe, Alexander thought, kindness created its own destiny, one small act at a time. Either way, their family had just grown by one, and Alexander Morrison was determined to make sure Marcus Chen never felt invisible again. The next morning, Marcus woke up disoriented, his body tensing with the instinctive panic of not knowing where he was. Then the softness of the mattress registered, the warmth of the blankets, the faint smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. Memory flooded back, and with it, a mixture of relief and anxiety. It hadn't been a dream. He was really here. There was a knock on the door, and Margaret's voice called out, "Marcus, breakfast is ready when you are. No rush." Marcus dressed in the clothes from last night. He'd need to wash them, he thought, then remembered he didn't have any other clothes. The reality of his situation hit him again. He was living in a mansion with a billionaire and his daughter, and he owned nothing but the filthy clothes currently sitting in a pile in the corner. When he made it downstairs, he found Alexander already dressed in another expensive suit, reading something on his tablet while Emily ate pancakes shaped like animals. She saw Marcus and waved enthusiastically, pointing at the empty seat beside her. "Good morning," Alexander said, looking up. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Marcus admitted. "Good. Eat something, then we're going shopping. You need clothes, school supplies, and whatever else you can think of." The shopping trip was overwhelming. Alexander took them to a mall Marcus had walked past dozens of times but never entered, the kind of place where security guards watched homeless kids to make sure they didn't linger. Now he was walking through those same doors with Alexander Morrison, and the security guards nodded respectfully. They hit clothing stores first, and Marcus tried to pick the cheapest items, the sale rack basics. Alexander noticed immediately. "Marcus, get what you actually like, not what you think you should settle for." "But this stuff is expensive." "And I can afford it," Alexander said firmly. "Please, let me do this." So Marcus, hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence, picked out clothes he actually liked. Jeans that fit properly, shirts and colors he'd always gravitated toward, a jacket that was both warm and stylish. Emily helped, pointing at things and giving enthusiastic thumbs up or down. She had strong opinions about fashion, and Marcus found himself laughing at her dramatic reactions. They bought school supplies next, notebooks, pens, a laptop that made Marcus's hands shake when Alexander handed it to him. "For schoolwork," Alexander explained, "and whatever else you want to use it for." At a bookstore, Alexander told Marcus to pick out anything he wanted. Marcus wandered the science fiction section, running his fingers over spines, reading back covers. He selected 5 books, then felt guilty and tried to put 2 back. Alexander took them from him and added 3 more to the stack. "Reading is important," he said. "Never feel bad about wanting books." By the time they returned to the house, Marcus had more possessions than he'd owned in the last 8 months combined. It should have felt good, but instead, he felt anxious, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Marcus found Alexander in his study, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk covered in papers and multiple computer screens. "Can I talk to you?" Marcus asked from the doorway. "Of course. Come in." Marcus sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. "I need to understand the rules." Alexander looked up, confused. "Rules?" "Yeah, like what you expect from me. What happens if I screw up? How long I can stay? The conditions." Understanding dawned on Alexander's face. "Marcus, there are no conditions. You're not a guest or an employee. You're family." "But there have to be rules," Marcus insisted. "Expectations. I need to know what happens if I don't meet them." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with that intense gaze. "You've been in foster situations before, haven't you? Or group homes?" Marcus nodded. 3 different foster homes in the 2 months after my dad left, before I ran away for good. And they all had rules, conditions, expectations you couldn't meet. "They had families already," Marcus said quietly. "Real kids. I was just..." extra. Someone they took in for the money, or because they thought it would be easy. When it wasn't, when I wasn't perfect or grateful enough or whatever they wanted, they sent me back. Alexander's expression hardened. I'm not them. This isn't that. Then what is it? Marcus asked, his voice rising with frustration. Because I don't understand. People don't just take in random kids and give them everything and ask for nothing back. That's not how the world works. Maybe it should be, Alexander said. But you're right. I do have expectations. Want to hear them? Marcus braced himself. Yeah. I expect you to go to school and try your best. Not to be perfect, just to try. I expect you to be honest with me and with Emily. I expect you to treat this house and the people in it with respect. And I expect you to let us help you, even when it's hard, even when every instinct tells you to run. Marcus waited. That's it? That's it. No conditions. No timeline. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. And if I screw up, if I break something or fail a class then we'll deal with it, Alexander interrupted. Together, like families do. Marcus, I'm not looking for a perfect kid. I'm looking to help a good kid who's had a bad run. Those are very different things. Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, some tight knot of fear he'd been carrying. I don't know how to do this, how to be part of a family again. Neither do Emily and I, Alexander admitted. We're still figuring out how to be a family of 2 after being 3. Maybe we can all figure it out together. Why aren't you scared? Marcus asked suddenly. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous or crazy or... You're a 14-year-old boy who helped my daughter when you had every reason not to, Alexander said. You're hungry and scared and trying to survive with your humanity intact. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Marcus wanted to believe him. God, he wanted to believe him so badly, but trust was a luxury he'd learned he couldn't afford. I'm going to disappoint you, Marcus said. Eventually. Everyone does. Probably, Alexander agreed, surprising him. And I'll probably disappoint you too. That's what people do. We're imperfect, and we let each other down sometimes. But that doesn't mean we give up on each other. It means we forgive, we learn, and we try again. He paused, then added, My wife used to say that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So that's what I'm asking from you, Marcus. Just show up. Be here. Let us care about you. The rest we'll figure out as we go. Marcus felt tears threatening again and fought them back. I'll try. That's all I'm asking, Alexander said. Then more gently, You've been taking care of yourself for a long time. It's okay to let someone else help carry the weight now. That night, as Marcus lay in bed reading one of his new books, there was a soft knock on his door. Emily stood there in her pajamas, holding a stuffed elephant that looked well-loved. She signed something, and Marcus shook his head apologetically. I don't understand. Sorry. Emily came in anyway, climbed onto the bed, and handed him the elephant. Then she pulled out her phone and typed, His name is Peanut. He helps when I'm scared. You can borrow him. Marcus looked at the worn stuffed animal, then at Emily's serious face. You sure? She nodded and typed again. You're my brother now. Brothers share. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Brother. He'd never had siblings, never been anyone's brother. The responsibility of it, the trust it implied was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. I'll take good care of him. Emily smiled, signed something that Marcus suspected meant good night, and left. Marcus sat there holding the stuffed elephant, feeling the weight of what he'd been given. Not just a home or clothes or food, but a place in someone's life. A role. A purpose. He thought about Alexander's words. Just show up. It sounded simple, but Marcus knew it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Showing up meant being vulnerable. It meant risking loss. It meant believing that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Marcus set the elephant on his nightstand where he could see it, a reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. Then he turned off the light and let himself drift off to sleep, not in fear or uncertainty, but in something that felt dangerously close to peace. Downstairs, Alexander stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the garden his wife had designed. He thought about the chance encounter that had brought Marcus into their lives, about the risk he was taking by opening his home and heart to a stranger. But Emily was smiling again, really smiling, in a way she hadn't since her mother died. And Marcus, despite his fear and distrust, was trying. That was enough. That was everything. I hope I'm doing the right thing, Alexander whispered to the ghost of his wife. I hope you'd approve. The wind rustled the trees outside, and Alexander chose to take it as an answer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Enrolling Marcus in school, helping him adjust, navigating the complexities of their unconventional family. But tonight, they were all under one roof, safe and cared for. It was a start. And sometimes, Alexander thought, a start was all you needed. The first few weeks were an adjustment for everyone. Marcus started school at a private academy that Alexander had connections with, and despite his fears, he found himself keeping up better than expected. The tutor Alexander hired helped fill in the gaps, and Marcus discovered that he'd missed learning, missed the challenge of understanding new things. Emily attended the same school, though in a different building for younger students. Every morning, they rode together in the SUV, Emily chattering in sign language that Marcus was slowly beginning to understand. Alexander had hired a sign language tutor for Marcus, and he practiced obsessively, determined to communicate with Emily without needing translation. At school, Marcus kept his head down, avoided questions about where he'd come from, and focused on his work. But rumors spread anyway. The new kid living with Alexander Morrison, the homeless boy who'd been taken in. Some kids were curious, others dismissive, a few openly hostile. Marcus had learned to handle all three types on the streets, and he handled them here too, with quiet dignity and careful distance. It was Emily who broke through his isolation. She'd appointed herself his protector, despite being 6 years younger and a foot shorter. When older kids whispered about Marcus in the hallways, Emily would march up to them and sign furiously, her small face fierce with indignation. Marcus didn't need to understand every sign to get the message. Leave my brother alone. The word still felt foreign, but Emily used it constantly. She introduced Marcus to her friends as my brother Marcus, signed about my brother to her teachers, drew pictures of their family that she insisted on hanging on the refrigerator. She was claiming him, publicly and persistently, and Marcus found himself unable to resist. At home, they fell into routines. Breakfast together before school, homework at the kitchen counter while Margaret cooked dinner, Emily teaching Marcus signs, Marcus helping Emily with her reading, Alexander joining them when he could, though his work often kept him late. On weekends, Alexander made a point of being present. They went to museums, parks, movies, normal family activities that felt surreal to Marcus. He kept waiting for it to end, for Alexander to realize this was too much work, for Emily to decide she didn't want a brother after all. But it didn't end. If anything, they seemed more committed as time went on. One Saturday, about a month after Marcus moved in, Alexander knocked on his door. "Got a minute? I want to show you something." "Oh, you?" Marcus followed him downstairs to a room he hadn't been in before. Alexander's home office, different from the study. This room was more personal, filled with photos and mementos, and a wall of awards and achievements. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, "about making this official." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Official?" I want to start the process of becoming your legal guardian, Alexander explained. Eventually, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to adopt you. Make you a Morrison, legally and permanently. Marcus couldn't breathe. You... What? I know it's fast, Alexander said, and I know you might not be ready, but I wanted you to know that this isn't temporary for me. You're not a charity case or a good deed. You're my son, if you'll let me be your father. The word son hit Marcus like a tidal wave. He'd been someone's son once, before his mother died and his father abandoned him. He'd thought that part of his identity was gone forever. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice shaking. Why would you do this? You barely know me. I know enough, Alexander said. I know you're smart, kind, resilient. I know you make Emily laugh. I know you're trying so hard to fit in here, to not be a burden, that you're exhausting yourself. I know you still have nightmares about the streets, because I hear you sometimes, and it breaks my heart. Marcus hadn't realized anyone knew about the nightmares. He'd tried to be quiet, to not disturb anyone. I know you're scared to trust this, Alexander continued, because everyone who was supposed to protect you failed. Your father, the foster system, society itself. They all failed you, Marcus. But I won't. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove that. What if I'm not worth it? Marcus whispered. What if you invest all this time and money and emotion, and I turn out to be a disappointment? Alexander stepped closer, his expression intense. Marcus, you could fail every class, break every rule, and push me away with both hands. And you still wouldn't be a disappointment, because you've already shown me who you are. Someone who helps lost children when no one else will. Someone who survives impossible circumstances without losing his humanity. That's not something that changes. That's who you are at your core. I'm scared, Marcus admitted. I'm so scared of losing this. Of losing you and Emily. I'm scared too, Alexander said. I'm scared of failing you. Of not being the father you need. Of letting my work consume me and missing important moments. But I'm willing to be scared if it means we get to be a family. Marcus thought about his real father, the man who'd left him with nothing but a note. He thought about the foster families who'd seen him as a burden. He thought about the months on the streets, convinced he was alone. And he thought about Emily's smile, Margaret's kindness, Alexander's steady presence. He thought about having a home, a room, a place at the table. He thought about being someone's brother, someone's son. Okay, Marcus said, the word barely audible. Okay, let's make it official. Alexander's smile was brilliant. Yeah? Yeah, Marcus said more firmly. I want to be a Morrison. Alexander pulled him into a hug, and Marcus let himself be held, let himself believe that maybe this was real, maybe this would last. When they pulled apart, both had suspiciously bright eyes. We'll start the paperwork Monday, Alexander said. It'll take time. Background checks, home studies, court appearances, but we'll get through it together. That evening, Alexander called a family meeting in the living room. Emily sat between Marcus and her father, sensing something important was happening. Emily, Alexander signed and spoke simultaneously. Marcus and I have been talking. I'm going to start the process to adopt him. That means he'll officially be your brother, legally and forever. How do you feel about that? Emily's face lit up like Christmas morning. She threw her arms around Marcus, nearly knocking him off the couch, and signed something rapid and enthusiastic. She says it's about time, Alexander translated, laughing. She's been telling her friends you're her brother for weeks. Now it'll be true. Marcus hugged Emily back, feeling the last of his walls crumbling. This was real. This was happening. He was going to have a family again. The next few months were a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews, and legal proceedings. Social workers came to the house, asking questions and observing their interactions. Marcus was terrified they'd find some reason to say no, some flaw in him or the situation that would end everything. But the social workers saw what Alexander saw, a family that was unconventional but genuine. They saw Emily's obvious attachment to Marcus, the way she lit up when he entered a room. They saw Alexander's commitment, the way he'd rearranged his schedule to be more present. They saw Marcus thriving, gaining weight, excelling in school, slowly learning to trust. The court date was set for early spring, 6 months after that first meeting on the street corner. Marcus was nervous, convinced something would go wrong at the last minute. But Alexander was calm, confident. "This is just a formality," he assured Marcus. "The hard part is over. Now we're just making it official." The courtroom was smaller than Marcus expected, less intimidating. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the case file, asked Marcus a few questions about whether this was what he wanted, and listened to Alexander's statement about why he wanted to adopt. Then she smiled. "I've reviewed this case thoroughly, and I'm pleased to grant this adoption. Marcus Chen, from this moment forward, you are legally Marcus Morrison, son of Alexander Morrison and brother to Emily Morrison. Congratulations to you all." Just like that, it was done. Marcus had a family again, a real, legal, permanent family. Outside the courthouse, Alexander pulled him into a hug. "Welcome to the family, son." The word son still made Marcus's throat tight, but now it came with a sense of belonging, of rightness. He was someone's son again. He mattered to someone again. Emily was waiting at home with Margaret, who'd prepared a celebration dinner. There was a cake with "Welcome Home Marcus Morrison" written in frosting, and Emily had made a banner that said "family" in big, colorful letters. They ate and laughed and took photos that would join the others on the walls, not filling the empty spaces left by Alexander's wife, but creating new memories, new moments of joy. Marcus looked around the table at his family, his legal, official, permanent family, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt safe. He felt wanted. He felt home. That night, as Marcus was getting ready for bed, there was a knock on his door. Alexander stood there, holding a small box. "I have something for you," he said. Inside the box was a watch, elegant, expensive, with an inscription on the back. "To Marcus, who showed us that family is built on kindness. Love, Dad and Emily." "It was my father's," Alexander explained. "He gave it to me when I graduated high school. I want you to have it." Marcus stared at the watch, overwhelmed. "I can't take this. It's too important." "Exactly," Alexander said. "You're my son now. This is what fathers do. They pass things down, traditions, values, watches. You're part of that now." Marcus put on the watch, feeling the weight of it on his wrist, the weight of what it represented. Legacy, belonging, love. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For seeing me when no one else did. For taking a chance on me. For making me your son." "Thank you for letting us be your family," Alexander replied. "For trusting us enough to stay. For being the brother Emily needed and the son I didn't know I was missing." After Alexander left, Marcus sat on his bed, looking around his room, his permanent room, in his permanent home, with his permanent family. He thought about the scared, hungry kid who'd been standing on a street corner 6 months ago, convinced he was invisible and forgotten. That kid would never have believed this was possible. But Marcus Morrison, son, brother, family member, knew better now. He knew that sometimes one small act of kindness could change everything. He knew that family wasn't just about blood or biology, but about choice and commitment and love. He knew that he was home, and this time, he wasn't going anywhere. The seasons changed, and Marcus settled into his new life with increasing confidence. School became easier as he caught up with his peers, and he even joined the robotics club, discovering a talent for engineering he hadn't known he had. His sign language improved until he could have full conversations with Emily without needing Alexander to translate. On the 1-year anniversary of the day they met, Alexander took Marcus and Emily back to the corner where it had all started. The spot looked different in the spring sunshine, less threatening, just another piece of the city. "I want you to see something," Alexander said. He pointed to a new building going up across the street. "That's going to be the Morrison Youth Center, a place for homeless kids to get meals, shelter, counseling, education support. Everything you needed and couldn't find." Marcus stared at the construction site. "You're building this because of me." "I'm building it because of all the kids like you," Alexander corrected. "The ones who slip through the cracks, who survive on their own because the system fails them. I can't save everyone, but I can create a place that might help some of them." "Can I help?" Marcus asked. "When it opens, can I volunteer there?" Alexander smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask. Who better to help those kids than someone who's been where they are?" Emily signed something, and Marcus understood. "We all help. Family helps." "Family helps," Marcus agreed. As they walked back to the car, Marcus took one last look at the corner where his life had changed. He thought about the scared, hungry kid he'd been, and the person he was becoming, someone with a future, with possibilities, with people who loved him. He thought about how one moment of kindness, one decision to help a lost child, had led to all of this. How Emily's small hand in his had been the beginning of everything. "Hey, Dad?" Marcus said, testing out the word that still felt new but increasingly right. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me part of your family." Alexander put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. "Thank you for letting us. For trusting us. For being exactly who you are." Emily took both their hands, and they walked together toward the car, toward home, toward whatever came next. A family not bound by blood, but by something stronger. Choice, commitment, and the kind of love that transforms lives. Marcus Morrison was no longer invisible. He was seen, valued, loved. He was home. And that made all the difference.